Welcome into another edition of Pittsburgh Postgame here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. This another Pitt Hoops edition here of Pittsburgh Postgame on PSL. This one after a Pitt loss. Last time we spoke to you was after a big statement win for the program, and since then it's not been as good for Pitt basketball. Still solid outings from Justin Champagnie, but Pitt now once again falling short after a loss to Wake Forest. They now followed it up with a loss here to North Carolina. Pitt now 8-4 on the year after a 75-65 loss to the Tar Heels. I'm your host, as always, Mike Asti, and I am joined alongside by none other than Alan Saunders of Pittsburgh Sports Now. Alan, obviously the Pitt program was really at a peak in that victory over Duke, and Justin Champagnie was getting national recognition, as he's definitely deserved. And we're talking about triple-double games with 30 points, and it was all great for the Pitt program. That was a statement win. Since then, it's not that they played awfully, but they have not been able to get a victory since then, with yet another conference loss, this one here at the hands of North Carolina. And getting a win over Duke and North Carolina in the same year, even with them not being ranked, would have been a big deal for this Pitt program. This was a game that Pitt was able to kind of get maybe back into it later on, but this was a game that North Carolina seemed to be well in hand most of this day. Xavier Johnson and company didn't give as much support to Champagnie as maybe would need to be there, and he played well, but did not give one of those dominating performances that we've seen, just wasn't able to do so. What did you see from this game, and what have you seen differently from Pitt? What's kind of happened that's been different for Pitt since that statement went over Duke? Because it's not been a victory since. There's not been a win since.
Yeah, I think North Carolina is a tough matchup for them stylistically. They've got really good bigs. If you look at what Baycott and Brooks were able to do, especially, I just don't feel like Pitt has an answer for that. They don't really have a center that's a strong rim protector. I like what Kareem Koulibaly gives them from a rebounding standpoint and from a floor spacing standpoint, but he's not, he's not going to stop those guys. And I think that's what I think at one point in the beginning of the second half, as North Carolina really extended the lead, they were shooting 70% on 2-point field goals. Like, right. That's just too many easy baskets for North Carolina, and Pitt never really had an answer for it. They went a little cold shooting in the first half, which I also thought was because of the size of North Carolina really impacting shots that you think Pitt should make. Dees Toney, 3 of 10. Xavier Johnson, 2 of 8. That's the rest of Pitt's big three, right? I mean, Champagnie, 23 points. And Johnson and Toney make 5 total shots. And so I just think that's where the loss comes from. Talking about the bigger picture, 2-game losing streak, I'm not really sure you can really connect the dots there. I thought the game against Wake Forest, they didn't play particularly well, and Wake Forest just played out of their ass. They just shot the ball like haven't at any point this year, like they have no business doing, and they won the game. And I don't think Pitt played very well, but sometimes that just happens, and I think this is just a tough matchup for them. Look, I mean, Pitt's 4-3 in the ACC. I think they're legitimately an upper middle class ACC team. They should expect to finish in the top half of the conference. That doesn't mean they should expect to win every Tuesday night when North Carolina comes into town. It's a tough matchup, a tough game. I thought they showed a lot of fight and battling back from what was a pretty lopsided deficit. But not everybody's going to have their fourth guard shoot 8 threes like Wake Forest did, and not everybody has 3 giant, super talented bigs. Why is this North Carolina team not better? Gotta look at this team, and they've got this huge front court in there, and it's not like these are stiffs. Like Baycott was a 5-star guy, and this should be an easy 6-7 seed NCAA tournament team, no problem.
They have a Hall of Fame head coach. It's not like he doesn't know how to galvanize the troops. Yeah,
I don't know why they're not a lot better. They certainly looked like they are better too. That's a little bit of it. They're just if North Carolina played like this all season, they'd be ranked. And Pitt just happened to get them in a game where they looked pretty darn good. I mean that was a tough performance. Pitt ends up shooting 41% after I think they were just over 30 in the first half. Like, they're not a great shooting team. That's about the best they can do. I'd like to see him get Justin Champagnie involved with the offense a little bit more in the late game stuff. He was a little bit absent at the very end of the game. This is not a second straight game against Wake Forest. And this one, if you're looking to make connections, that's one that I saw in both games where I felt like his presence was not felt on offense in the final possessions of the game as things kind of went down to the wire.
It's exactly what we kind of talked about in the last post-game show after that statement win over Duke, that while Justin Champagnie has been dominating, he's been the MVP of this team, to say the least, and one of the better players in the ACC, if not in the country. The reason why Pitt was on a winning streak at that point, and the reason why Pitt got a statement win over Duke, was because it wasn't just him. Everybody else was also contributing. Tony, Johnson, they all were contributing and not only giving points, but giving rebounds, assists. It was a full team effort. That's why you mentioned Pitt has a big three of sorts. That was the conversation then. Well, we now see what happens when it's kind of just a one-man show and Xavier Johnson struggles to score. And Champagnie ends up with 23, but had 16 until early on, really, in that second half. So he got a lot going on in the first half, but then not really a part in terms of the scoring of the end of the game and that comeback. And that's why the score ends up being 75-65 with a victory for North Carolina. I do also think it's fair to say this Pitt team maybe was ahead of schedule in terms of what people expected from this year. I don't know if anyone thought the emergence of Champagnie would be like this. They certainly are an upper echelon ACC team this year, but of course that includes a down year for both Duke and North Carolina. And North Carolina clearly showing the potential that they have with that talent. It is almost fascinating those two programs aren't better this year with the talent that is on those rosters. Mike Asti here, Alan Saunders of Pittsburgh Sports Now. Pitt losing back-to-back conference games. That Wake Forest game, 76-75, very, very close, where Wake Forest kind of did just shoot out of their you-know-where that Alan explained. And then, of course, North Carolina's talent just takes over, and they get a pretty convincing win for them that maybe will crawl them back into the rankings at some point soon, as they are now 11-5, Pitt 8-4 overall and 4-3, as Alan mentioned, in the ACC. Now, Alan, was there something that North Carolina was able to do in particular? Because it also was North Carolina hitting shot after shot after shot. They really showed their talent. Was it simply that North Carolina played to their A game for the first time in a while, or did they maybe watch film from that Duke game and their rival, and was there something they were able to do to crack the Pitt defense and something else that happened, or should we have just seen more of this from North Carolina and then it wouldn't have appeared to even be close to an upset based on how North Carolina had been playing?
Yeah, I don't think anybody has the front court that North Carolina has to execute this game plan anyway. Like, that's one of the things that makes, like, I think that's hard to take a lot of takeaways from this loss because like, nobody else is going to do that to them. I don't know, maybe there's like, if they get to the NCAA tournament, there's a couple, nobody else in the ACC is going to do that to them. And I don't think Carolina could have learned it from anywhere else. Like, that's just UNC doing what they do best. They did a really good job of it. I don't think Pitt was particularly I don't think they had a really good game plan for dealing with it. I'll have to go back and they won this game last year at the Pete.
Right.
I'll have to go back and kind of maybe take a look at that because I don't think they had a particularly good game plan coming into this one for how to deal with the bigs defensively. And foul trouble has been an issue for Kareem Koulibaly all season. He finally gets 30 minutes tonight, only had 3 fouls, but they didn't guard anybody. Like that. So I don't know if they made some kind of adjustment to try to keep him in the game and it backfired a little bit. I might have to take a look at that. But I just felt like their post defense was pretty non-existent. They let it get into the post too easily and too often. And then they got bullied on the glass. Turns out 37-29, but it was really the offensive rebounds, 14 offensive rebounds for North Carolina that were really backbreaking. 18 second chance points to 9 in a game where UNC wins by 10. That was really, just the size of North Carolina and Pitt not having a way to deal with it. And look, there's been holes in this Pitt team for years. I really think they've fixed one of them in their three-point shooting that stopped teams from going zone against them so frequently. We talked about in the Duke game, I thought Coach K made a mistake playing so much zone against them. they still don't really have a center that's like a guy they want to have the basketball all the time, right, or who's an elite rim defender. And fewer teams can take advantage of that weakness than a team that can't shoot threes. But North Carolina just happens to be one of those teams, and they happen to get them tonight. And I think that, that's why one of these things I hesitate to take too much out of this loss, because I don't think a lot of teams can do what North Carolina did to them tonight. And I think you just kind of, at the end of the day, you kind of have to tip your hat and say, well, those guys are bigger and better. And hopefully they don't see them again in a situation where it's really meaningful. But that's about, Notre Dame isn't going to do that on Saturday. I'll tell you that much for sure.
No, and we'll get there in a moment too. Mike Asti, Alan Saunders here, Pittsburgh Sports Live. This is the Pitt postgame show here on Pittsburgh Sports, Pittsburgh postgame, and Pitt losing 75-65 North Carolina with the over the Pitt Panthers here tonight on this Tuesday night basketball showdown here in the ACC. And you kind of mentioned it, and the stats bear that out. Horton, 4 rebounds, Tony, 2, Johnson, 1. That's just not enough around the superstar that they have. And then, of course, 12, 8, 7, 7. Nobody else in double digits in scoring. That wasn't the case in the Duke game. You're seeing a lot more offensively, a lot more on the glass than just around the one star. And this was a game that it really was mostly a one-man show. Horton 4 for 11, Tony 3 for 10, Johnson 2 for 8. Not solid shooting performances from the Pitt Panther, maybe co-stars, whereas North Carolina just shooting the lights out. And I think that's the issue there. And that happened also against Wake Forest. We also did mention that one of the missed opportunities, it seems, for this Pitt team, despite having an emergence of a star player, despite getting all these national TV games, despite playing well in some of them, and despite playing better than maybe some would have thought this year, in terms of trying to snag a ranking, Pitt just kind of puttered themselves away from that opportunity with these back-to-back losses, especially after that statement win over Duke. What do you think Pitt has to do to flirt with that opportunity again? Because they do still have quality games here coming up. And as you mentioned, it's hard to take too much away from this loss. So it's very possible Pitt looks really good again against Notre Dame and kind of gets off this snag. They certainly have a star player that can lead them in that direction, but they do now have more work to do to get back into that national respect, which will play into it when you're looking at seedings for tournaments and things like that. When it appeared after that Duke game, it was a slam dunk they were at least going to be there in March.
Yeah, I think it's all about consistency, right? That's what got Pitt into the conversation about being in the tournament, was when they won those 3 straight games. They beat Syracuse twice, they beat Duke. Right. You can lose a game, you can even lose 2 games. It doesn't really matter. Like, it's not like these losses are, window closing or season ending or anything like that. They just need to get back to consistently winning basketball games. And I think this was a pretty tough stretch of their schedule. Like, they played 2 games against Syracuse, which has always given them trouble. Duke and North Carolina, with like Wake Forest is that sort of seemingly obvious trap game stuffed in there against a bunch of teams that they care way more about beating. And that was, but again, like, it doesn't get easier in the ACC. That's the problem. They've got Notre Dame, who's not particularly good at the Pete on Saturday, but then Virginia Tech and Louisville, and those are 2 very good teams. And so, it keeps going. But I just think they need consistency. I think that's the thing that they've been searching for, and they're still searching for it at some levels. I thought they had a lot of promising performances tonight in that regard, but not quite there for enough for a team win. But they just need consistent team play. If they go out there the rest of the year and they win the games they're supposed to, and they're competitive in the games that they aren't, they'll be in the conversation right at the very end.
Alan Saunders, Mike Asti here. You also can head over to Pittsburgh Sports Now for all the post-game coverage of Pitt's loss to North Carolina. Of course, the game recap. We're going to even have some videos here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. It's all over there for you. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter at PGH Sports Live here for the channel, and at PGH Sports Now for the site. over there in the mothership and bottom of this video, click that subscribe button to help us get our content to you as easy as possible. When anything is released, you'll get a notification. Pitt losing here this evening, 75-65 to North Carolina. And as Alan mentioned, it might have been that perfect storm of a really talented team that's been underachieving, that was shooting the lights out, and Pitt struggling shooting around their superstar with those co-stars. Not a recipe for success. But Alan, moving forward here, because we've also seen a few different lineup tweaks for Pitt the last few games. And of course, that statement went over Duke, but now these back-to-back losses. You have this tough schedule coming up, and Notre Dame definitely appears to be a game that Pitt needs to win to get back on this winning track, certainly if they care about seeding for anything moving forward here for March and the madness of March. But ranked teams after that with Virginia Tech, with Louisville, etc. What lineup do you like for Pitt? What do you think is their bread and butter five, or does it maybe change depending on the night? Is it a cyclical thing based on the opponent?
No, I think the starting five they have is the starting five they're going to play the rest of the year, and I can't imagine any changes to it. Johnson, Toney, Champagnie, Horton and Coulibaly. I mean, that Horton, I think, is the one guy you can maybe make the biggest argument for replacing, but he had 12 points tonight. I mean, and
he was 4 for 11. He was 4 for 11.
But he's that guy that's going to make the threes that keeps defenses honest. They don't have anybody else that's going to do that.
And Coulibaly's minutes were higher tonight than normal, so that's another player that play him.
I think the bigger question is the rotation. Nike Sabande has not been a very big part of it. He got 7 minutes today. I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more of him. He's looked a little lost defensively a couple times, though. Will Jeffress, we haven't seen him in 3 straight games now. Is he going to find a way back into the rotation? I don't know. That's the only question to me. I think the lineup is the lineup, and I'm a little bit surprised looking down here that the five starters all were like 35, 36, 33, 34, 30 in a game where you're losing by 18, I think, at one point. It was 16. It was 16.
It was 66-50 at one point.
66-50. Yeah, I would have thought that Jeff Cable would have gone to the bench a little bit more. But those are the starting five. I don't think there's any question about that.
Yeah, and maybe he didn't because he realized Horton, for example, who maybe is that one player that's questionable because his percentages aren't great, but he can hit 3-pointers, and Pitt was able to crawl back into that game a little bit. They went from 16. They end up losing by 10. Clearly, that's more of a narrow margin. So this is definitely the five. I would maybe think the minutes could be reduced, though, if things are switched out, and Coulibaly could be that player that maybe is switched in and out of the lineup depending on how things go. Moving forward here on the schedule, though, Alan, what do you expect for that game on Saturday against Notre Dame that you mentioned? Because that's going to be completely different than this one. This is a North Carolina team that was red-hot shooting. They had their best night of the season. It's an 11-win team, but a team that's lost 5, that's been really underachieving most of the year despite all the talent, which is confusing when you watch a full game of seeing North Carolina play, despite not being ranked this year. Same thing with Wake Forest. They're a struggling team, but they managed to hit the lights out. Notre Dame is a team that also is struggling, that some maybe had higher expectations for. What do you expect from that game? Because as you mentioned, a trap game with Wake Forest, I hate to say anything is a must win, but that's really a big deal to get that victory with Virginia Tech coming up, with Louisville after that. You don't want to lose 3 in a row. You don't want to make this a 5-6 game losing streak going into important basketball into February, into mid-February, and then into March. They got to get that Notre Dame win. How do they do it?
Yeah, I think it certainly becomes now a very important game when maybe it wouldn't have, just because Notre Dame isn't that good. But I think they're a better team than Notre Dame. I think they just need to show up and play their game. I don't think they need to do anything special.
I think if they didn't drop Wake Forest, there wouldn't be as much of a must-win that I'm saying. I mean, that's
listen, if they want to make the tournament, they've got to win these kind of games that they should win, and Notre Dame at home is certainly a game they should win. They should probably come pretty close against everybody. Like, I don't think there's a team out there that I think,
right.
Maybe Virginia is going to really shut them down on defense. I don't know. But there isn't a team out there that I think Pitt should be like, we just can't win this game. And even though North Carolina looked a lot better than them tonight and looked like a very imposing matchup, like you were saying, go watch some of North Carolina's games. They haven't done that to everybody. They played really well tonight. I don't think there's anybody that Pitt needs to be afraid of. I think they can beat everybody. They just have to be consistent. And I think they've generally played pretty well coming off a loss, and this was not a loss that they should. I don't feel like they should have their heads hung low after this one. They played a fair game that, it just were a little bit outgunned, and North Carolina played well. And so we'll see. But I expect them to bounce back against Notre Dame. And if they do that, look, that Virginia Tech game is going to be tough. That's one of the best teams in the conference. But I think they're a better matchup for Pitt than North Carolina is if the Tar Heels play like they do tonight. So anything can happen.
Yeah, and Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State, Clemson, and then Virginia, top 10 team. The schedule does not get easier. And I also do think the macro picture of the Wake Forest loss, despite being a 1-point loss with the team that was just kind of playing just out of their minds, that does make the Notre Dame game more of a must-win for this Pitt team. But it's very fair to say that when you have a player like Champagnie who can dominate games, and honestly, despite only 23 points in this game, and you hate to see only 23 points because that's certainly still a solid outing, it's just not a 30-point triple-double, he still was very, very efficient. I mean, I bring up Horton and Xavier Johnson not being efficient. You go to him, 7 for 9 from the field. He still was a very efficient player in this game, didn't have the opportunities to maybe make it a 30-point outing, but it really was not a bad effort for him by any stretch of the imagination, and very likely Pitt to have the best player on the floor in most of these games moving forward on the year, which certainly is a major advantage. Anything matchup-wise, though, with as you mentioned, talking a little bit on the Virginia game, but even Louisville, or Virginia Tech game, and then Louisville, and then moving forward, that would be a problem for Pitt? Because obviously the Notre Dame game is against a struggling team, but is there anything that Pitt needs to do different? Maybe when you mentioned stacking of minutes, when you mentioned defensively, was it just North Carolina hitting the shots? Anything Pitt schematically needs to do different potentially?
I mean, I don't think Pitt's going to get a lot better in post defense. I mean, that's just kind of who they are. I think Xavier Johnson can play better than he did tonight. I think Adi Toney can play better than he did tonight. I think if Pitt
anything with Xavier though, because this has been several games where he's struggled now. He didn't even play well against Duke.
I mean, yes and no. I felt like he distributed the ball really well against Duke, and he played defense really well. He just didn't score at a high level. I don't really felt like he played his best overall game tonight. I don't think he was very good at Wake either. And he needs to get to the foul line. When he has his best game, he's driving to the paint and getting fouled. He's had games this year where he's had 10, 11, 12, 13 free throws. He was 3 or 4 today. Toney was 2 of 2. Neither of those guys were getting fouled. And North Carolina has big guys that are, the tall trees. I think Pitt needed to get at them in transition and get them before they get set up and run a little bit more and really keep that North Carolina defense from ever getting set. And that's how you get them. That's how you get a 6'10" guy to foul a 6'2" guy, because he's not standing there like the Empire State Building. He's running down the floor like a big awkward dude that he is. And then he has to foul because he's not as athletic as Xavier Johnson is. And so I think that's the answer for Pitt, but that's easier said than done. And you have to get stops on defense to run, right? You have, and Pitt just wasn't getting stops on defense. North Carolina was getting all those easy buckets, and then the guys sprinting back, And when it's
that brings up the question though: was it just North Carolina hitting shots, or were they getting easy buckets?
No, they were getting easy buckets, and it's because that Pitt had to help on the bigs, and North Carolina was making the passes and finding the open guy. I mean, Pitt didn't have the answers to defend one-on-one. They had to help, and North Carolina did a really good job making them pay for help defense. But when it's a no doubt guy makes the extra pass to a guy who's coming down the baseline wide open, the whole rest of the North Carolina team is already back on defense before the guy ever even jumps to make the dunk. Right? Like when they're that open, you can't go run then. Like there's no transition game. You at least need contested shots where guys are in there trying to get a rebound to run the other way. And then Pitt didn't do a very good job of getting the contested rebounds. I think, and again, North Carolina is very big and physical. I thought they were the more physical team, even though they're bigger. But I think Pitt needs to run against bigger teams to be more successful on offense, but they need defensive stops. And I think that's going to be hard to come by if you have a team with a big and talented front court as NC has.
Again, the NC game might just been a game that's a bad matchup for Pitt. North Carolina might have just been a bad matchup in terms of their size, in terms of their talent. Whether or not we've seen it throughout the year is immaterial. We definitely saw it tonight in a big game, in a big win for North Carolina as they crawl back into respectability here and maybe ranking for themselves with a win over the Pitt Panthers. North Carolina getting the win 75-65 over Pitt. Pitt now 8-4 on the year. North Carolina now 11-5, and Pitt has that game on Saturday with Notre Dame, which now really is, for all intents and purposes, with March in mind, is a must-win. With that schedule getting brutal here moving forward, I do think you make the point of needing to show your athletic ability and run when the team is bigger than you. They might not be facing too many other teams that are bigger than them, but you have a rebounder and you have a star like Champagnie who's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not going to necessarily muscle you. So you do need to use what is to your advantage. And I don't know if Pitt did that here tonight. Not to say the effort wasn't there, though the effort certainly was there overall in this game, but it just might have been allowing too many easy transition points and compounding that with North Carolina also an efficient day. They had 3 players in double digits in scoring. So that's certainly a big advantage for North Carolina when Pitt only had 1. And again, the second leading scorer for Pitt behind Champagnie was Horton with 12, and he went 4 for 11 in the game. So again, the co-stars didn't give the production that Pitt saw in the win over Duke. Alan, anything else here as we close up shop? I mean, this is, as you mentioned, it's not a game that Pitt's going to hold their head low. This is not a game where I think Jeff Capel is going to feel like I'm really, really upset and disappointed with my team. This is a team in North Carolina that was underachieving earlier in the year based on the Hall of Fame coach, based on the talent. The schedule does get tough here moving forward, and a lot of teams in college basketball have tough schedules moving forward. Say we went on the ACC this year because, we could go on and on about that, but this is a Pitt team that certainly has their future and their destiny in front of them if they can take care of business. So this is not the end of the world by any means.
Yeah, I think you've said it pretty well right there, and we'll see what happens on Saturday. I'll still be here. I'm missing my usual credential background now because I'm down in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, and I got to see some Pitt guys today, Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver and DeMar Hamlin, all out there practicing for the Senior Bowl, and looking forward to 2 more days of practice. Then we got the Senior Bowl itself on Saturday down here on the campus of South Alabama, which is fairly gorgeous. I knew next to nothing about the school, and but here's what I did know. I know they're the Jaguars, and they have a helmet that just says Jags across the helmet.
Okay.
And so for the next 4 days, my goal is to get myself a Jags T-shirt or something. Go Jags or something like that.
Does it make you wish the Jacksonville Jaguars did that and we can get a Carter Minshew Jags T-shirt that he would walk around with and Jags on the helmet?
I'm good with it being South Alabama because that's even more obscure. People won't know it's like a real thing. They'll be like, where'd you come up with this?
They'll think it's like a semi-pro football team or something.
Yeah, right, exactly. and so I need to get me one of those. But yeah, it's good to be on the road again, covering some sports. And thanks for picking me up here on the old Zoom call.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I will say technology throws some kinks in some aspects of journalism, but it also makes it easier in some others. You can pull up a Zoom press conference over dinner rather than having to drive somewhere, and you can do these post-game shows no matter what anyone's schedule says. Alan, with a lot there for you, obviously covering the Senior Bowl over there on Pittsburgh Sports Now, and also some of that may trickle to SteelersNow.com as well as
I was getting a
Pittsburgh
good look
Sports
at this
Live.
Alabama tackle today that Nick Farabaugh, who's our analyst at Steelers Now, has been talking up. Leatherwood is his name, and he looks like a Steelers lineman to me. So it was good to see him today too.
Yeah, and I know, and we have some posts already about what some of the national media are predicting for the Steelers. We'll see what actually occurs. Alan can scout that for you. And also, I will say to give some credibility to Nick Farabaugh there, for anyone not familiar. He was right on the money with Alex Highsmith all through our draft show, which we will do again here on Pittsburgh Sports Live, and predicting him prior to the draft when I don't think many even knew who he was. And then that certainly worked out for the Steelers, at least him individually. So we have all that for you. Pittsburgh Sports Now, Steelers Now. Of course, more hoops shows here, more Pittsburgh postgame. We're going to have a Pittsburgh hockey edition here coming up later in the week with Matt Geica and company. And then I'm going to be doing more of these basketball shows here for Pitt and WVU moving forward as these schedules certainly don't get easier. So we got some good games coming up thanks to COVID and other tweaks to the schedule. They're stacking them. In particular, it's going to be fun for the Mountaineers with those back-to-back against Baylor. So that's going to be interesting now, thanks to COVID-19. For Alan Saunders, for all of us throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family of networks, since it clearly is a family affair based on all the coverage Alan's putting forth there at that one Senior Bowl, spreading it across the Now family of networks. Also for all of us here at Pittsburgh Sports Live, I'm Mike Asti. He's Alan Saunders. Pitt losers here tonight, but again, maybe a blip in the radar. We'll see what happens moving forward. Pitt losers 75-65 to North Carolina. North Carolina now 11-5. Pitt now 8-4 on the year as they have that next ACC contest against Notre Dame, a big game against Notre Dame. Now they need to take care of business on Saturday. So we'll see where Pitt goes from here, but nonetheless, destiny is still in their hands. All right, thanks.
Good stuff. You can